So, oath of allegiance to new members, the Honorable Deputy Governor Acton.
I, Aidan Harrigan, do solemnly and sincerely affirm and declare that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to His Majesty King Charles III, his heirs and successors according to law.
That's your fancy pen.
The Honorable Attorney General Acting.
I, Serena Connor, do solemnly and sincerely affirm and declare that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to His Majesty King Charles III, his heirs and successors according to law.
Thank you. Thank you, members. This morning, the Assembly will continue with the debate of the Bill for Appropriation 2024, Act 2023. I believe the Honorable Member for Sandy Hill was on the floor. Just before I call for your continuation, I just want to say I trust that everyone had a good Christmas day and continue to have a good Christmas season. I mean, the Christian calendar tells me there are 12 days of Christmas, so I trust that it will go quiet and happy from here on. I am mindful of those who have lost loved ones, and we pray for comfort for them. And I'll give members an opportunity at the end of today's session to convey holiday greetings to members of the public. So the member for Sandy Hill, I believe you have an hour and a half left in your presentation, so you may continue.
Thank you. Good morning, Madam Speaker. Good morning to members of this Honorable House and to the listening and viewing public. Madam Speaker, I hope that everyone had a blessed Christmas. On the last occasion that we were here, last week Wednesday, I was on my feet, Madam Speaker, when we were met with some very disturbing news, and as a result of that, I think it was right and proper that this Honorable House would have taken the adjournment as we did on that last occasion. And since then, Madam Speaker, we would have certainly on the opposition side, we would have lost one of our founding members, the Honorable Mr. Eric Reed. a former member of the House, former Minister of Education, and a former District 3 representative. And so it has been a difficult few days, Madam Speaker, certainly for Anguilla as a whole, in terms of the losses that we have recently suffered. And so I do echo your sentiments in terms of looking for a bright and better future in the new year and in the days to come. Madam Speaker, when I left off, I would have been about to begin my presentation, which would have corresponded with the Honorable Premier's budget address at page 8. And that section would have been dealing with, or is dealing with, the debt portfolio review in the public debt. And at the first sentence, it says the downward trend in public debt continued in fiscal year 2023. And at that time, Madam Speaker, the member for Island Harbor would have expressed to the general public the reason why, and he would have quoted the words of the Prime Minister of Barbados, Honorable Mia Mottley, as to the reasons why you should pay down debt. And, Madam Speaker, I want to bring to the public just a couple of items. And it is good and right and honorable and proper to bring down debt, public debt. In fact, bring down any debt. And I think if we look at it in the context of each of us in our own homes, those of us who have taken a car loan, those of us who have taken a loan for our house, a mortgage, etc., we will have incurred debt, and it is necessary that you pay down that debt. It's an obligation that you have contracted for. There was a purpose for the contracting of that debt, and your obligation is to pay the debt as it comes due, or even in advance, if you are able to. And so the idea of a downward trend in public debt, Madam Speaker, is not new or unusual, and in fact, that is the nature of debt. So in the 2020 budget, at the section of compliance with the framework for fiscal sustainability and development, the budget will have outlined the fact that the government has been in breach of the debt benchmarks since 2008, and these are the benchmarks that are set by the framework for fiscal sustainability and development, the agreement. And with that agreement, Anguilla was required to be in compliance by the end of 2017. But interestingly, Madam Speaker, it says here, however, and this is at page 77 of the budget for 2020. It says the government has been in breach of the debt benchmarks since 2008. And in accordance with the FFSD, that's a framework for fiscal sustainability and development, the government is required to be in compliance by the end of 2017. However, the UK government approved borrowing in support of the banking resolution in 2016. And the compliance date was extended to 2025. It goes on further to say, Madam Speaker, however, following the impact of Hurricane Irma in 2017, the compliance date has been extended to 2030. And so what was important about this statement in the 2020 budget, and of course, these similar statements have been in place in previous budgets, but I highlighted 2020 because this was the budget that would have been brought under the hand of and it was approved on the 7th of May 2020. It was brought under the hand of the Honorable former Minister of Finance, Honorable Mr. Victor Banks, but it was similar statements in the 2021 budget and continuing on, Madam Speaker. So the whole idea behind the benchmarks that the Honorable Premier will have made mention about is that there's a public debt. Anguilla has been in breach of the guidelines that have been set by ECCB. And over the years, from the period of time where the majority of the debt was incurred, 2016, there has been a continuous pay down of the public debt. Now, what is clear is that in 2017, there was Hurricane Irma. And so additional debt had to have been incurred. And so because of that, the debt would have increased. And so, Madam Speaker, I'm looking at the Government of Angola Debt Portfolio Review 2016 to 2020, and this was dated September 2021, which has been under this administration. And the reason why I'm going through this is because I don't want the general public to think that we just walked into a debt, that this administration just walked in and a debt just appeared in front of it for no reason. I'm setting the backdrop so we could understand why we are where we are, and to bring some sort of clarity as to the reason and how the debt has been paid off over the period of time between 2016, when the banking resolution was dealt with, to today. And so it says in the Government of Angola Debt Portfolio Review, and this is prepared by the Debt Management Unit, the Ministry of Finance and Health, Government of Angola. It says, at the end of the 2020 fiscal year, debt associated with the banking resolution stood at $306 million, a decline of 6.75 or 3.1% over the outstanding balance at the end of 2019. And the debt at the end of 2020 associated with the banking resolution accounted for 64.26% of the debt. It sets out in this document that as the economy was set to rebound from the devastation of Hurricane Irma in 2017, the year 2020 marked the beginning of the COVID pandemic. It brought economic activity to a near standstill. And 2020 was a year of significant decline for Anguilla, with a real economic contraction of 27.35%. And this came after an expansion of 5.4% in real economic activity in 2019. So what does this say? This says that in 2019, there was economic growth. And you have seen the rebound coming off of Hurricane Irma, the devastation Irma would have caused, etc., but the country began to do better. And then in 2020, with COVID, the onset of COVID, the country was closed, significant decline, and economic contraction of 27%. So all of this has implications, Madam Speaker, in relation to the ability to pay down debt and the rate at which you can pay down the debt. And in fact, in terms of what is required to be able to keep the country afloat in the meantime. And the public debt composition, and this is in the 2020 portfolio review, it says that at the end of 2020, the Angola Social Security Board held the largest share of total debt, accounting for 44.96%, which equates to $214 million of the portfolio. So what does this mean? It means that when the banking resolution was undertaken in 2016, one of the primary reasons why the banking resolution had to take place was in order to save the Social Security funds. $214 million as at the end of 2020. So imagine a space in Angola where a banking resolution did not take place, where depositors' accounts, bank accounts for every person who has an account in either Caribbean Commercial Bank or the National Bank of Angola was lost, cents on the dollar. The Banking Act prior to 2016 was that you would only be able to receive 30% of what was in your account. And so you can imagine that not only was there a need to save people's bank accounts, their life savings, their hard-earned monies. There was also a need to save the Social Security funds. And so when I hear persons criticize the banking resolution and the fact that there was a debt that was incurred as a result of the resolution, I have to wonder if they're really being genuine and honest. Because to not have implemented the banking resolution would have resulted in what I would call social chaos. A sick person, an elderly person who has the life savings in one of those banks took ill. And instead of being able to access the monies that they had, that they saved for their entire lives in that account, they would have had nothing, or next to nothing, cents on the dollar. Can you imagine what would have taken place had those two banks closed in their entirety and there was no relief for persons who had monies in those banks? Social chaos, Madam Speaker. And so as a result of that, the banking resolution was a necessity. Having sat through it, having seen the options that were there, the 5 options that were available, I am satisfied that the government of Anguilla of the day made the right decision in securing what is today the National Commercial Bank of Anguilla, securing the Social Security funds, securing the bank accounts for the people of Anguilla. And despite all of the negativity and the criticisms, I have yet to hear what a viable alternative would have been to the banking resolution. And of course, we talk about, oh, you inherited this debt and you inherited that. And every administration inherits something. The Anguilla United Front administration inherited the banking situation, where in 2013, under the AUM administration, the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank came in and took conservatorship over the banks. And for 2 years, the banks remained in that state. They could not remain in conservatorship forever, and so a decision had to have been taken, and that decision was placed on the footsteps of the Anguilla United Front administration. But there was no complaining. It was a difficult task. I've heard the Honorable Premier make mention about their administration having walked into a difficult situation. And I had to laugh to myself because I thought it was so cute, the situation that this government thinks that they walked into. Because the previous administration had to deal with so much more than public debt, than seeing the end of the COVID pandemic. As I made mention, 2016, having to deal with the banking resolution, but of course that met us in 2015. 2017, Hurricane Irma, widespread devastation across the country. And then in 2020, just when the economy was about to rebound, and we see from the reports that in 2019 there was an expansion in activity in the country, 2020 was set to be a bumper year for the country. And what happened? In March of 2020, we were met with the COVID pandemic. And so when you talk about difficulties in an administration, imagine having to deal with 3 disastrous consequences for your economy during one 5-year term in office. It was as if it was a whirlwind of disaster during that term that you had to deal with each and every occasion that arose. You could not shirk it, you could not ignore it, you could not pretend it did not exist. You had to deal with it. And that's what the Anguilla United Front administration did. So in 2020, and it was interesting because I went back and I looked at the Executive Council minutes in June of 2020, just before the elections. And at that time, there was a discussion in the Executive Council which spoke about a slow reopening of the country. And that was in response to the needs that were raised by our tourism sector. And there were plans where we were looking at reopening, a slow reopening of the villa sector first and then expanding into other sectors. So there were plans in place in terms of reopening safely so that we could start to generate additional economic activity and generate revenue for the country. And so any administration coming in would naturally have had to continue the same trend. Keep the country safe, because you met it in a safe condition, and open the economy. And so that was the challenge. Generate economic activity. Deal with the debt that you have met. And of course, all of the Anguilla program projects from 2017, which had come on stream and which were in the process of being constructed and developed. And we're talking about the health centers, the hospital, and remember in 2020, we had additional resources had to be allocated to health to deal with the COVID pandemic, to ensure that we had sufficient space as persons were tested positive and were ill, that they could be transitioned over in a safe way so as not to create widespread infection and cause difficulties over at the hospital. And so a separate unit had to be developed. So funds had to be reallocated all the time. So you're dealing with any number of factors at the same time. And so when we're looking at the public debt, and we're talking about how that debt was incurred, the banking resolution, Hurricane Irma, and of course there were funds that were allocated for the development of the Anguilla Community College, and I'll touch on that in a few minutes. And so, Madam Speaker, I would have seen the Honorable Premier's presentation. Well, I can't say it was a presentation, it was more of a public post that was talking about the decrease in the debt over the years. And it was very interesting to me, Madam Speaker, because what I saw was a slow or an eventual decrease in terms of the public debt. What do I mean? In the Government of Anguilla post, it spoke about a quote from the Honorable Premier where he says that my government continues to build reserves and has recorded $179 million at the December date, and we'll come back to that. An addition of $119 million when compared to $60.57 at the end of the fiscal year 2022. And then it talks about the total public debt as at December 2020 to 2023. Now, Madam Speaker, the very document that I was speaking about, dated September 2021, shows the decline in the total public debt. Because the reality is that Anguilla has never defaulted on its debt obligations. But of course, in 2018, that debt was increased in order to deal with Hurricane Irma and a number of other issues at that time. And so after 2018, you would have seen a continual decline in the public debt. So where the Honorable Premier's post, or the government's post, picks up from December 2020 to 2023, and it says 493 million, and then 467 million, 447 million, 371 million. This is from year to year, from 2020 December to 2023. So between December 2020 and 2021, the government will have paid down approximately $25 million in public debt. Between 2021 and 2022, the government will have paid down approximately $20 million. And between 2022 and 2023, the government paid down approximately $75 million in debt. So it's more than 3 times the amount of debt that was paid down from the year before. And so, as I've said, paying down debt is commendable. There is a reason why you naturally have to pay down on your debt. Not only that, the Honorable Premier has indicated all of the reasons why, which is true. The obligations, the fact that the borrowing of the country is dependent on approval from the UK government, etc., because of the extent of debt that we have. Now, I say all of that to say that when you come into office and you meet a debt, but you understand, because all of the documents that are before me that I made reference to are since 2020. And so it is clear that there's a very clear explanation as to how the debt was incurred and why the debt was incurred. It's clear that the UK government signed off on the ability for this government, for any government, to be able to take on additional debt. The banking resolution, obviously the UK government saw it as a necessity, or else they would not have signed off on it. And that public debt, of course, would have created a significant over $500 million in debt through that resolution alone. And that, of course, as I mentioned, included the Social Security, which was by and large the largest amount of that debt. You also would have had payments that were owed to the Deposit Protection Trust, which were people's monies in excess of a certain amount that were in the bank. The government simply could not secure that amount at the time, and so those funds were placed in a Deposit Protection Trust, so that over time, the funds would be repaid to those individuals. CDB was another obligation. And so